Hello and welcome to another Wastewater Wisdom Live here at Graph HQ. This is a part of our Tuesday live series, our product-focused live series in which we deep dive, we get specialists in the hot seat and we deep dive into all things product-related. And this week, like I said, is all about wastewater treatment, and we're here for Wastewater Wisdom Live, and we're joined by my colleague David, the resident specialist on all things wastewater. How are you doing, David?
Yeah, very good. Nice to be back speaking about wastewater treatment following last week on rainwater. So lots to talk about today, and hopefully the audience finds it useful. So we've got some interesting topics to discuss today.
Is this your favourite subject?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Out of both, rainwater and wastewater, you prefer talking about wastewater?
I think talk about wastewater is more interesting, yeah.
In fact, finding some wastewater more interesting is something I've never heard before. But anyway, we'll get into today's session. So the main topic we're going to be discussing today, we touched on it briefly for the last wastewater treatment wisdom when the question come in about sizing a system. And we wanted to go more into the detail about it. So first, we're going to get David to discuss, obviously, how we size a wastewater treatment plant, what you need to consider when sizing the treatment plant and getting the correct one for your project, and also the importance of making sure you have the correct size system for your project and for your needs. So David, take it away.
Okay, we did touch on this last time we had wastewater treatment live a few weeks back now. But yeah, really wanted to talk about sizing of systems in a little bit more detail, because there's quite a lot to consider when sizing a system, whether this be for a new project or potentially upgrading an old system. We mentioned last time that we generally refer to the British Water Flows and Loads Guide when sizing a wastewater treatment system. And within there, we break down the type of waste. It's referred to as the source of waste. And we need to identify what's basically sources of waste we need to treat, and then we make an allowance for how many people we're doing that activity or event on a said day, and it's the maximum it can potentially be. And you'd always implement a size based on what the maximum would be on any one day. You wouldn't put in a treatment plant, for example, and then have an event day where you would have potentially, if it's a wedding venue, for example, if you basically got a standard 100 prop system, for example, and then you have a wedding day where you've got 200 people come to the site, you need to build that event into your wastewater treatment system sizing. So it's something to bear in mind. When we talk about sources of waste, we have lots of different examples within the Flows and Loads Guide. This is very typical. You may see things like standard residential. You may see pupils in the school. You may have holiday chalet, so people are staying away, office staff, restaurant covers. There is really a large number of things to consider when talking about wastewater flows, which would flow into a wastewater treatment system or a foul water network. So there is really quite a bit to think about. And on top of that, as I just mentioned, there's the frequency as well. So understanding, for example, how many people use a restaurant on a daily basis, so or how many pupils will attend school. So really lots to consider when sizing a wastewater treatment system. Just to build on that one step further, towards the end of the guide given by British Water, there are also some sizing coefficients. And when we talk about sizing coefficients, this may be an increase on what we would expect in terms of the flows, or it could be a decrease. So when we talk about a group of homes, for example, you will know that we generally have a sizing reduction applied to it if we have a set number of people feeding water into one particular plant. Likewise, though, if you were to have basically a block of flats or potentially an overnight stay centre where they do laundry and stuff on site, there would be an additional increase in terms of the flows for the laundrette to treat those additional fabrics and bed linens and stuff. So it's all kind of highlighted in the subsection at the end, but there is quite a bit of depth in that one document, which can really give people a very good introduction to how to size a wastewater treatment plants.
And when we're discussing this, we're very much talking about commercial systems. As with domestic, it's very much a case of plussing 2 onto the amount of bedrooms the property has in order for the domestic side, but we're talking more commercial and larger systems.
Yeah, I think you're quite right to distinguish between the two. If you're just talking a one-off development, it's relatively straightforward. You may need to consider, of course, if it's going to be a holiday home, for example, for someone down near the coast, where they may be using it only for a said number of days per year, or it could be that they rent it out to other people. So there's lots to consider in terms of seasonal loading as well. But yeah, certainly on domestic residential property where you're going to have a family living there full time, we would generally look at the number of bedrooms the property has, and we'd add on 2 number, and we generally look at that being the maximum number of people that potentially live in that home. So, for example, if you were to have a 3-bedroom house, we would look at implementing a 5-person system because we expect a maximum of 5 people to live there. So, domestic side of things is generally straightforward. When we talk about commercial system sizing, we need to get a lot more in depth in terms of the expected flows we think is going to come in. That could be provided by the guys on site. And of course, it's also good to get a second point of view. Me interpreting information probably is completely different from you interpreting the same information. So it's good to have 2 separate points of views, and then basically bringing those ideas together, and then basically say why you've done certain things. And of course, you can then go to a conclusion. Once you've got an idea of what the final system size would be, that should be then given back to the guys looking after the project for them to say, yes, that's fine, it's all signed off. So we're happy that the system will be in place and it's designed for what we want it to do. This is also quite an interesting topic to build on this and talk about future proofing. So future proofing is a bit of a loose term, I suppose, but if you were to have a campsite, for example, or a holiday park where we are just starting up, and then they may have the land to build on later, but they want to get some income first before they then do further investment into the project. With wastewater treatment systems, you can, of course, install one for each individual stage of the project, but you could also look onto build onto the existing one. Or if you have got the financial investment up front, you can actually install a system size to support the whole site when it's at completion. Certainly when we talk about graph systems, we talk about 2 or 3 line systems where we have separate control cabinets, but very much the same number of tanks. And we just basically turn on the additional lines when we have more occupancy on the site. This can also help us when we talk about seasonal loading. So if we were to have, of course, again, if we talk about a holiday site, we can have seasonal loads where we have very good people attending the sites in the summer, and that may drop off in the winter. So with a 2-line system, of course, we can shut down one of the lines and then save on potentially energy consumption, wearing of components within like the compressor and stuff. So really it's got quite a lot of flexibility. But yeah, future-proofing kind of needs to be thought about. If you know the system project is going to develop, it might be something that you want to look at, whether you want to just do individual runs for each section, or if you want to put in a system which can then be flexible in terms of how the project develops.
And so for commercial developments, let's say, for different projects, so say a campaign site and a restaurant, would you have different potential coefficients and different things you need to consider when sizing that treatment plant? Will there be like different parameters for each?
Yes. If you wanted to get into a bit more detail, with the sources of waste, certainly, if we refer back to flows and loads, when we talk about restaurant covers, there's different types of restaurants in terms of the amount of flows we would expect coming into the tank. So the treatment variables we look at are usually the flow, the BOD, and the ammonia. And basically, we implement a system size to treat with the highest concentration of those 3 to ensure that we're getting a very good treatment performance at the end. When we look at the treatment parameters, we expect those numbers to change depending on the source of waste. So if it's a restaurant cover, for example, it might be 25, 18, and 5, for example, for the flows, the BOD and ammonia. And then if we were to compare that to, say, did you say holiday chalet?
Yeah,
holiday chalet. That could be anything in the region of like 150 to 220 litres of flow per day per person, of course, the BOD and ammonia increase respectively as well. So there is quite a lot of scope in terms of the amount of waste we would need to treat coming into our wastewater treatment plant. So it is quite important that you look at this sensibly, and yeah, as I said, potentially get 2 people to have a look at it and then compare ideas and hopefully come to a decision, a collective decision at the end.
But just to confirm, the British Water Flows and Loads Guide is free to download
off their
online
website.
off the British Water website.
It certainly is, yeah. So it's a free downloadable document. Anyone can have access to it. It's a really useful tool. We use it pretty much here every day, and so do all the other manufacturers within the industry. So it's a really good starting point. If you are using it yourself and it's the first time you are using it, speak to any one of the manufacturers that do manufacture tanks. Of course, they've got a lot of experience using this document, and they could guide you and help you with your system size. And so don't be scared. It's good to really get this part correct, so then we know what we've got a good working system going forward.
And we talked about the importance of getting the correct size earlier. You talked about obviously future-proofing the system to make sure to get the correct size. But what other factors could be determined to make, so say if you don't get the sizing correct, or you have a system too small or a system too big, what else could that affect in terms of kind of effluent at the
implications? Okay, if we talk about the biological process within the tank. Within most wastewater treatment systems, we need to have a minimum loading of 25%. This is basically to ensure that we get the good working biological process in the tank to break down that incoming foul water. So if you're oversizing the system, it's not too big of a deal. Having the additional space in the tank to basically aerate that incoming foul water, generally speaking, you would get a much better treatment process at the end if you were to ensuring that you're still getting that minimum 25% loading. Of course, if you have oversized the tank as well, this may help with the desludging interval as well. So most treatment plants will have a desludging interval, whether this be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, depends on whether it's domestic or commercial, quite a bit of parameters. But oversizing the system, of course, we've got more storage within the tank. We'd, arguably speaking, have to empty the tank less often. So that's something to bear in mind. On the other side of the coin, if we are talking about potentially undersizing the system, there can be quite a damaging effect. This is much more on the environment, of course, because we're discharging effectively water which hasn't been treated correctly. So this is where we need to be very careful, and this is why we'd always err on the side of caution and go bigger if we could. But with undersizing systems, we're not getting the space we need in the tank for the treatment performance. We are, of course, decreasing the space we have, so we've got to pretty much empty more often. If we then talk about flows themselves, if we've got a lot of flow coming through the system, you could be discharging way too much water than you need to be, which may have a damaging effect on the tertiary treatment you've got afterwards, because off the back of a treatment plant, you may be discharging to a water course, which would directly impact the environment. But if you're going to something like a drainage field or a drainage mound, you're very much decreasing the life of that system, because we're not getting the quality of water discharged in the system that we need. So really is very important, I think, to get the system sizing correct where we can.
Perfect. I think that's quite the comprehensive talk through of how obviously to size it in the first place, but also the importance of it and the implication that could be caused if sized incorrectly. So now that we've covered the main topic, it's now time to dive deep into the project highlight for this week. So we've got a 250 pop system up in Scotland, I believe, that we want to discuss. We've got some decent photos from a recent maintenance that we've done. So I'll hand the reins over to you, David, to talk us through this project.
Yeah, cool. So this was quite an interesting project. I mean, I think we spiked back in October of last year, and it's just pretty much coming to completion now. So we've had the commissioning, and we just had our first service there, just to ensure that everything's working correctly. The site itself is actually on it's called Threave Gardens. It's a gardens estate. So it's an old stately home where they've got open gardens where people can go and wander around. So really is quite a nice project to have been involved in. In terms of the system supply, as I said, it's a 250 pop. Now, for us here at Graph, that's actually a 3-tank system. So it incorporates quite a large SBR tank up front, quite a large primary tank up front, where we basically collect all of our waste before then lifting it through into the reaction chambers, which were 232s, 1,000-litre tanks, to do the treatment process. And we can see from the photos there, we've got relatively, the land there's obviously, this is where the photos were taken just after completion, so we haven't had the lawn relaid yet, but you can see the discs on the soil surface there of where we've got the manhole accesses into the tank. So green flat lids, relatively discreet, and once they get their lawn in, it'll hopefully be very discreet in terms of what the end customer will see. Towards the back of that first image, you will see the control cabinet. So the control cabinet is very much separate from the underground tanks. The control cabinet contains all the electrical equipment that we have to control what's going on inside the system process. So you can see from the picture now that we've got the compressor and the control panel on the left-hand side, and then we've got the air distribution manifold on the right, which is feeding the air we need to do the treatment process down into the underground tank. So really is quite an easy system to gain hold of, being an external cabinet, of course. If maintenance service does need to be carried out, we don't need to gain access to the building to do so. So really is quite a nice feature to have. And of course, the control cabinet itself is lockable, so only service engineers can gain access to it if we needed to have any problems with security, which I'm sure they won't have. But it's just something to bear in mind.
And then we've also got images of the rebed. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, you're correct.
Tertiary
Yeah.
treatment.
Yes, exactly. So the system itself is discharging into a pump station, and that pump station is set for a certain timer to lift the treated effluent water up into a final rebed system. So you can see the rebed now. That'll of course grow up over time, and then of course add a tertiary layer of treatment to the effluent water. So we've got very, very good final quality of effluent.
Yes. And then I think this is the final photo. So obviously they've laid down the grass. As you can see, this is kind of the rebed kind of starting to take shape.
It is indeed, yeah.
Perfect. So that is a nice project highlight. Obviously another large commercial system that we've supplied and obviously maintained afterwards. And very nice to see kind of the end towards it, where sometimes we see obviously go into a water course or even a soak rate, but it's kind of different to see a rebed in place.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
So I think now is time for the questions that have come in during the live stream. So our glamorous assistant will get the questions on screen and we'll answer them for you. Perfect. So the first one that's come in, what are the running costs of a Graph one-to-clean sewage treatment system?
Okay, so with the one-to-clean system, we would typically associate this with domestic initially, so domestic homes, but we do large treatment systems when required for high quality of effluent. But on the domestic side of things, it is very, very cheap to run. With the Graph systems, we talk about sequence batch reactors, so SBR systems. So we're getting the control panel to run the compressor at set intervals per day. So whereas most other treatment systems on the market will run our compressor pretty much 24/7, with the Graph systems, we generally run it between 8 and 12 hours a day, depending on the population size. So we're automatically decreasing the runtime of the system versus potentially other systems in the market by up to 50%, potentially more. On the smaller systems, when we talk about energy consumption, it's quite tricky to actually work out a cost directly, because we have, of course, lots of different energy providers. So what we can do is we confirm how much the unit is running per day in terms of kilowatt hours per day. That will vary slightly on the treatment plant size, but with that information, of course, the homeowner can then work out what their power is per kilowatts, and of course they can then work that calculation back through to find out how the system is going to work. I think we typically say that for the 5-pot system, I think it's 43.
Yes. Yeah.
Kilowatts. Is that
kilowatt hours per person
per day? Yeah. So very, very minimum, and yeah, that's enhanced further, slightly increased as we get to larger systems, and of course larger compressors to control the system process. So if you have got a direct question in terms of how much it will cost me, just drop it in the chat and we'll answer you afterwards. But yeah, if you wanted to find out exactly, we'd need to get some further information from the customer first.
Perfect. And next question that's coming in, what's included in the kind of scope of supply of a treatment plant?
Okay. If we're talking about from us, we generally supply the tank itself and then the controls that come with it. This one would normally come on 2 separate pallets from us. So you'll get the tank on its own pallet ready to be lifted off the delivery vehicle, and then you'll have your own separate accessory pallets. And that accessory pallet will have the controls, the hoses, all the other bits is on that come with the system. So if you were to even look at not a standard system, but an advanced system, when we talk about plus modules, so we may have an additional pump, dosing, remote modems, all this sort of stuff. All this will come on that separate pallet with the electrical equipment ready to be installed if and when necessary. So included from the supply from us is pretty much the kit as designed for the customer's needs, whether this be an internal supply or external. So we do our own housing cabinets as well. So hopefully that answers the question. But
so basically, on those 2 pallets, the first one with the tank will be kind of the tank, the diffuser, the airlift, and the sampling chamber.
yeah,
That's
so
all
the
the
tanks
internals.
all tanks pretty much fully assembled, ready to be placed into the ground.
And then on the accessory pallet, you'll have the lid, the air hoses that feed the airlift and the diffuser, and then it will be obviously the control panel, compressor, or if they do need it, an external cabinet on there as well.
Yeah, so basically the separate supply for the underground tank ready to be pulled through. Certainly the SBR hoses pulled through from the control cabinet into the underground tank.
Perfect. Another question that's come in: how clean is the water that is discharged from the tank?
Okay, this is an interesting question. You may hear within the industry that water discharge from our water treatment plants is drinkable. It certainly isn't. So any myths about that, don't pay attention to them. The water itself, of course, is very clean. It may have might be coloured slightly just due to the suspended solids within the solution. But yes, we generally see a transparent liquid discharge, certainly from a wastewater treatment system. This is generally affected, of course, within the treatment process itself, whether it be one of our SBRs or a competitor's treatment process. So it could be an SAF, it could be rotational disc, whatever it may be. We generally look at, of course, the quality of water achieving the parameters left out or set out by British Water, which is generally 20 to 30-20, which we've mentioned before on this channel, where we talk about the concentration of the BOD being 20 milligrams per litre in the effluents for BOD, suspended solids at 30 milligrams per litre, and then the ammonia at 20 milligrams per litre. So those are the general parameters we look to. Most treatment plants will conform way better than that. The reason why we can't say the water is super good, of course, is because the pathogens and microorganisms that escape in that water as well. We are looking at future technology to treat that water further through disinfection. This could be through UV or potentially chlorine dosing in a reaction tank there afterwards. Again, that would get the water quality to potentially a standard where you could reuse it back into your garden, but there's no certification in place at this moment in time in the UK to say that you can do that. So the water itself is absolutely superb in terms of what comes into the tank. But yeah, just be careful when says, "Oh yeah, I can drink this water." You certainly can't.
I actually know a story of someone that drank it. I won't share the details because it is very vulgar, but I'll tell you after. It's so bad. Then we have another question that's come in. How often would a treatment plant need to be maintained?
Okay. Maintaining a wastewater treatment system, we normally define this into 2 separate areas. We have the servicing side of things, where we would like an engineer to attend the site, check on the treatment process, just to say that the system is doing as well as it should be, check on the wear of the components, all this sort of thing. And we generally like to see that happen on a domestic system once a year. With the commercial side of systems, you generally want to have a minimum of 2 per year, just to make sure, of course, that's the larger system. It's got kind of more working components. We generally need to have more visits. And then building on that one step further, when we start talking about additional modules, where we talk about potentially phosphorus mitigation and stuff like that, we generally like to incorporate potentially 3 or 4, just because of the parameters of discharge, where we need to basically ensure we're really conforming the best that we can be. We of course need the treatment plant to be working at its optimum level. So depending on whether it be domestic or commercial, it steadily increases in terms of what we need to achieve from the treatment plants. The second side of that is the desludging interval. With desludging, we'll generally get a system size in place, and you'll get a technical data sheet supplied, certainly with one of our systems, which will tell you what the desludging interval may be. Generally with desludging, it's generally the size of the primary catchment chamber. That basically dictates the size and the frequency of that we would need to desludge. With domestic systems, it's generally every 12 months. And then with the commercial side, may drop down to, again, every 6 months or potentially 4 or 3 months. So I think it's quite important to remember, though, that if you have got a servicing set up on a system, it's kind of important to go and do the system servicing first before you then have the tank emptied. It's basically get an understanding of how well the treatment partner's performance is performing. We need to have, of course, sludge within the tank. So if you have the tank emptied prior to going to do a system service, of course, we haven't got a fully working treatment plant. So it's kind of good to stagger the two, just to ensure that, we're getting the best understanding of how well the treatment plant is performing.
Perfect. I think we have a few more questions that have come in. What are the benefits of using graph systems over competitor systems? That's a throwy question, isn't it?
It's not really a throwy question. You can pitch in as well if you want to. Right, graph systems themselves, of course, we can talk about the tank and the quality of the system components and all that sort of thing. But I think it's just generally, certainly when we talk about wastewater treatment systems, it's the adaptability of the control panel and the ability to control the system process. With the graph system, we've mentioned having the control panel and then supporting the compressor and basically telling what the system needs to do in the underground tank. This gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of the amount of oxygen in the tank. When we start talking about phosphorus mitigation or reduction of total nitrogen, it's always good to monitor the level of oxygen in the tank. And through the control panel, we can change the level of oxygen within the dissolved oxygen within the water to basically optimize the breakdown of that foul water. So with most systems, you'll generally have rotating discs or basically compressors running air through diffusers into the tank 24/7. This gives us a very good level of oxygen for breaking down organic material. Certainly the carbons and stuff like that, but it doesn't really give us the ability to tackle the nitrogen compounds. So by being able to drop the oxygen level down, we can treat those nitrogen compounds a lot more effectively, and that gives us in the end a much better quality of discharge. So certainly in relation to reduction of total nitrogen, with being an SBR system, we have that control to do so. Is there anything else I want to say on this? Benefits of using the graph system.
And if we touch on installation, because that's obviously one thing that people would consider is why would I install a graph system over our competitors? We know that with our systems, we can have a gravel base and backfill, whereas most systems on the market, you need a concrete backfill.
Yes, this comes right down very much to the type of plastic that is used within the system process. You see different types of tank manufacturers. It could be, if you're talking old school, it could be concrete, but more commonly you would see glass reinforced plastic, which incorporates the concrete and backfill, as you say. With being polyethylene tanks, generally we would recommend the use of gravel, which gives you a lot more flexibility during the installation, not having to get wet concrete or lean concrete mixed down onto the site, and doesn't have to allow that to set. So with the gravel, you get a lot more flexibility in terms of your time installation of getting the tank into the ground. I also think it's quite important when we did talk about servicing and maintenance that we have the controls and the software away from the underground tank. I mean, the underground tank itself doesn't have any moving components within it, so we don't really have to get down in there. We've got no electrical pumps or discs moving or anything like that at all. We've got no media in the underground tank, so the tank itself is pretty much there to just basically take samples of water just to ensure that we're getting what we need the system process to do. The working controls, of course, are in our cabinet, which may be in a plant room. It could be an external housing enclosure where the engineer can gain access to it to really do the system checks on that quite easily.
So if something were to go wrong, no one would need to go into the tank very much. So they would be able to see from the control panel compressor if the system is working as it should be.
Yes, it will give you a very good first glance of how well the system is doing. Yes.
So no need to open the lid, get your head in the tank to have a look and hold your breath.
You don't have to get your waders and your scuba gear.
You can just look on the control panel and it will tell you if it is working or not.
Yeah, very much so.
Perfect. And we've got some more come in. What are the likely failures of a treatment plant?
Likely failures from a wastewater treatment system. Okay. When we talk about failures, it's usually going to be some form of electrical side of things. It may also be not understanding, or the homeowner understanding that they have a wastewater treatment system in the first place. So it's important to remember that the wastewater treatment system is a working biological system, and we need to basically look after it where we can. So we basically want to have biodegradable items going down into that tank, so then the treatment biological process can happen. If we start putting plastics and rubber, cans, hair dye, all this sort of stuff down into the tank, generally it will upset that biological process. Again, you could also refer to cleaning products in excessive amounts as well. It's good to achieve an equilibrium, a balance within the tank, so we can ensure our treatment plants works as well as it can do. That's in relation to the biological side. In terms of parts themselves, we do have, with all different types of wastewater treatment system, working components on this system, and they will wear over time. So certainly the compressor, whether this be a diaphragm compressor, piston, could be rotational blades, they will have a lifespan. The set of installation structures that come with them will tell you what they need to do. You may need to change the air filter. If it's a piston or a diaphragm compressor, that needs to basically just be taken out and just washed and then put back in again. If it's a rotary vane compressor, you need to take the blades out and replace them every 3,000 working hours. So there's a bit of understanding and appreciation that needs to be taken into consideration of the working components. If you do wanted to get a better understanding, of course, all manufacturers will offer a service manual with the system. There is quite a lot of information within those. It's kind of why we kind of recommend to get service engineers involved who have got a general understanding of how those systems work. So make sure, if you are worried, to get a competent engineer in to basically service your system. Of course, if you did need to want to know more about it as well, that I'm sure they can give you some on-site advice as well. So certainly here at Graph, we're very flexible in terms of sending engineers out, and if you wanted to learn more about the system, the engineer will discuss it with you in terms of what we look for, how the system works, and yeah, generally some good tips to ensure that we're getting the best from the system.
Perfect. And I think we've just had one more. If someone needs help to size their treatment plant requirements and they want a graph system, what should they do? Is this a question for you or me?
Well, it could be for either of us.
I'll let you take it. You've had all the rest.
Okay. With wastewater treatment system sizing, if you certainly talk about a graph system, yeah, please do contact us. I mean, by all means, if you want to give it a go, have a bit of fun. I would call it fun. Most of the people won't. Have a look at the British Water website and download their Flows and Loads Guide version 4. Again, even if you have that document in front of you and then you call us, at least you can then make an appreciation of what we're looking at. We can then talk it through with you what your requirements are for the project. And then we can basically guide you, and then hopefully together we can come to a conclusion on what the system size will be that you require. And then if you're happy, then we can design a system and implement it going forward. So, yeah.
So long story short, if they need a treatment plant sizing and they want a graph treatment plant, who they're going to call? Not Ghostbusters. They should call us. And we'll be able to guide you all through the way of sizing the treatment plant, making sure you get the correct system for your project that caters for your needs. And I think that's everything that we have for today. We've got the thumbs up from our glorious assistant to say that is all the questions that have been answered. So thank you once again for tuning in to Wastewater Wisdom Live. Join us next week for Stormwater School Live. Unfortunately, we won't have David. That will be his rotating week off, but we'll have a specialist on all things stormwater management in the hot seat to answer your questions. So once again, thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch it. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.